That's fine.
Cool. Thank you, everyone, very much. I'm going to go ahead and start my timer, so we are going to be on track and on schedule because this ship is rolling. So, howdy. My name is Joshua Franklin. I am part of a company known as Outstack. We are here today to basically talk about voter registration security on this panel. Also with me, we have John Lai from the Turnout, and we have Dr. Beata, I'm not going to say her last name, from IFAS. We have, three very different perspectives on voter registration and cybersecurity. I basically did, my own external assessments. John basically knows how voter registration systems work from, the actual inside, election administration technical level. And then, Dr. Beata has, a very large international viewpoint on the entire concept of voter registration and how it's affecting, the whole world. And so, so we're going to basically talk about that. I think I'm supposed to have a joke before we basically start out. So I'm going to say, this is a very important issue. We do have folks here who are not from the U.S. And they don't necessarily have voter registration in other countries. I want to say this is still a very important topic for you. Basically because when you came into the U.S., you also did get put into a database. Wasn't a voter registration database, but, the whole overarching topic is still kind of very important to you. I got a couple groans. I'll take that. I'll take that. So, VR is very important. We actually haven't had a lot of discussion about this topic here at this conference, and these are the actual systems that, we are confirmed, basically to have, tax against. And so it is a very, real and applicable topic. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about my work. This is just my work. I have worked for other people while doing this stuff. This is no one else's stuff, and I'm not, conjuring, anyone else's name. And this is party agnostic work. So Outstack is basically a public benefit corporation in DC, basically, focused on campaign and cybersecurity for basically election infrastructure. We have a, pretty fun platform out there that can basically find copycat sites, fake donations for, candidates. It's a big issue, but that's not what we're talking about here today. So I am from NIST most recently. And that's where I basically led the, VVSG cybersecurity election working group that we sort of talked about earlier. There are a huge number of folks who participate in that working group here, and I do want to say thank you. I have a listing here, and I'm sorry if I, missed anyone. Lynn, Lulu, Josh B, John McCarthy, Whitney, Kevin, Neil, Trevor, Maurice, Mark, and then of course Gemma. So thanks to everyone for all that time and effort in making the next generation of cybersecurity standards something that we all made together. They're not going to be perfect, but they're definitely better than what we had, and I'm really excited about that. So I did work at the Election Assistance Commission as well as the Center for Election Systems. I've been a poll worker in 9 states. I don't know anyone who's been in 9 states. So put that out there. See if you can beat me. There are laws actively working against you because you have to live there typically, so it gets complicated. So I've got 15 years with basically vote capture and tabulation systems, and 7 years with basically, campaign cybersecurity. This whole talk basically started because in 2016, 21 states basically got, attacked in some way, shape, or form by Russia, basically, right? Some states said this isn't a breach. We weren't really attacked. They were definitely put into a difficult position there. But I mean, it definitely ultimately, led to DHS, basically getting in, the whole designation of critical infrastructure, and it really started this nice sharing of threat intel between the federal and state governments. But that's where I got kind of interested, like how secure are the voter registration systems, and what can I do as just an outside, person? I wrote that whole platform that I talked about earlier back in 2012. It basically, was, scanning about 2,000 candidates per election since 2012. But with the 2016 attacks, it seemed like I could be, also scanning voter registration systems. But not just that, there's a whole bunch of, internet-facing election tech. So you have, election night reporting. You have, SOS websites, State Board of Election websites, voter registration websites. Your average state has about 4 to 5 election related URLs out there. Some of those are all on very different servers. Some of those were originally put into work in maybe 1998. Some of them haven't necessarily been updated yet. And what I really started seeing when I was looking at these systems is that the voter registration systems are actually really new, which is nice. They're actually doing something important on on the internet, and they are generally well run is what from the data you're about to see. But the State Board of Election websites and the Secretary of State's websites, they're typically run completely separately, and those need a fair amount of work. I mean, so we ultimately saw things like versions of Microsoft IIS from say 2003. We saw things like certificates shared with like porn sites. Yeah, I mean, so like really basic cybersecurity issues on some of these websites weren't necessarily being, paid attention to. So we, ended up scanning all of these websites and then in a, responsible fashion, giving that, information back to the election officials and seeing if we can get those issues, sorted out. We intentionally didn't try to use the connections I have from working in this space. I was really interested to see if, like what it would, be like for a white hat hacker to basically, start reporting vulns to a State Board of Election office. What would that process look like? And what I really found is that there wasn't a process in place. And it ended up being Twitter was the easiest way to get into contact with someone who had some sort of responsibility for the IT infrastructure, which is really interesting. Yeah. So at the time of our scans, there were 37 voter registration systems, bless you. Yeah, and most of them were actually running on a .gov domain, which is really difficult to actually typo squat or put like a phishing site up on it, which is really great. But there were also some that were running on like .org and .us, which is not the best. Does anyone know what website you go to get a .gov website? .gov. Okay. Yeah. They had a good time making that. They did. Yeah. Yeah, so let's, take a look at some of the results here, right? So there were, 37 here. So what we saw basically is, doing legally allowable, external scans. We weren't super able to go deep and actually see what was really going on underneath the hood. These are essentially, TLS implementation scans. Basically, you can, think of SSL labs, but sort of done with, Qualys, in-math SSL scripts, basically. Also started, looking at Shodan and Census to basically, look at the underlying infrastructure of these. So we basically saw that, something like, 56% of the voter registration sites were actually in a good position, and that's like way better than I thought, honestly. They had a few were A pluses, there were a few Bs, and then there was 1 C and 2 Fs. So the actual rubric here is Qualys's SSL Labs rubric, and this is basically like a big industry standard. And bless you. Yeah, so we saw these C's and these F's, and we're like, we really got to get in contact with these voter, with these voter registration system owners, and that ended up being a fun adventure, a multi-month adventure. Looking a little bit deeper here. We didn't see any Heartbleed, we didn't see any Poodle, we did see Beast. We also saw just really old tech being used when the voter registration systems were, running on shared servers with the Secretary of State website and State Board of Election websites. So this is like not terrible news. And it's pretty cool because we can now take this data and use it as a benchmark for 2020 and say, are things getting better? This doesn't tell you everything. These are only externally non-authorized scans. These were what lawyers told me that I could do without getting sued. And I love not being sued. It's like my third favorite thing. Yeah. So if we actually take a look at these, State Board of Election and Secretary of State websites, it looks a little different. The stats are a bit different. So we had about 25% getting an A. 25% getting a B, but then we had like 20% that didn't even have TLS or SSL turned on. And that is still, to this day, a pretty large issue. And so, the argument that I've basically been, making to states is that, using TLS doesn't necessarily help you. It actually helps the people who are going to your site, your actual voters. And that's been an argument that I do think has been sort of, resonating. And so, if we keep going here, again, more Beast, new Poodle here, and then no Heartbleed. These are not super serious things here with, Beast and Poodle, but, Heartbleed would be, and we, thankfully didn't see any there.
Can you just say what Beast, Heartbleed, and Poodle are?
Okay, yeah, so, Sure. So they are, basically all, issues with the SSL or TLS protocol. That is basically, when you see HTTPS, that is something that, a lot of people think as, this website is secure, right? But there are sometimes, underlying vulnerabilities in that protocol that are actually, helping to make that website secure. Heartbleed was really interesting because you could basically just ask for really key important information that would wreck the security of the whole server, and it would just give it to you. Can I have the most? Sorry, no. These are actual vulnerabilities that could be exploitable by hackers and or malware. Thank you, Kim. Yes. No. Great point. Yeah. So what she was saying is that these are sort of the, in the cybersecurity industry, it's kind of become popular to market a vulnerability. If you found one, it helps to get you famous. Also helps people to understand what you're actually talking about. And so these are three sort of well-known ones that I could sort of scan legally. Again, please don't sue me because we had some issues with that. Because I didn't just scan the State Board of Election websites, the voter registration systems. I also scanned every single, candidate running for the 2018 election and reported all that information back to them. And I also scanned some of the vendors as well. I was interested to see what their websites looked like. And they definitely fared worse here in this area. Interestingly, I found malware on the American Samoa election website, and they actually run a separate .gov and .org website, and they were basically infected with malware through a back-end Drupal vulnerability, and it was very difficult to get the election official on the phone to basically get this sorted. I really wanted to. Honestly, the time difference was terrible. I know it sounds foolish, there's going to be a time difference. It was awful. And the, election official there was only the election official like a quarter time. And they had a third-party contractor that would help with the actual IT infrastructure. And so all three of us had to be available at the same time to get this thing sorted out, right? And, the actual malware started noticing if you're coming from a, US IP address, and so it would only, show itself if it's, if basically someone's originating from like a non-US IP, which definitely made it difficult to prove to some of the other election officials that this was going on. So, we ended up sending this information to the, to the federal authorities, and then, the actual elections infrastructure, ISAC. So what I will say is that contacting election officials about some of these vulns were very difficult. I think folks were not ready to have, folks that they didn't know from the outside say, hey, there's a problem with your system. When I finally got into contact with people, it was mostly over Twitter, DM, and then eventually, Amy from NASAD helped out because we were running up against some time crunches to get stuff sorted. I would say it generally took about 3 months to get one of these issues sorted out. I was intentionally coming as an outside person that they didn't know, and there had been a lot of attacks on the election infrastructure lately, and so I do think that they were reasonable to be cautious. So thanks to everyone who helped, get me in contact with the right folks there. So I did present an hour-long presentation about this at DefCon. It was super fun, and a bunch of the members of the National Guard from various states started basically contacting me. And I just want to say to everyone, I found them extremely competent. They were trying to do really great things. And so I was bouncing, issues I was finding off of them and vice versa. I also learned what the National Guard was. I really didn't know. I thought half of y'all don't actually know. And so some other states reached out and said, we want county level scans done. And so I would, basically do county level scans, and it was super, super fun. I think we definitely made the whole election system measurably more secure. I think that's really cool and not something that we get to do in, elections often. And so, given permission, we could definitely do more in-depth scans. So what I've, sort of been talking to election officials about this is, put, 2FA on your voter registration system, buy common domains, because I found lots like registerstate.com, registerpennsyltucky.com, and they are fake voter registration systems, and think they are intentionally confusing people. And so, there needs to be someone with a larger bank account than me to go purchase some of these really common things that an average voter would basically go to on accident. Definitely use a, trusted cert, update your systems. There is an industry standard for basically, reporting a vulnerability, and it is security@yourdomain.com.gov. And so if it's Pennsyltucky, it would be, security@pennsyltucky.gov. And that's how, a white hat external researcher is going to be trying to get into contact with you to basically report vulns. So it'd be worthwhile to set up responsible disclosure, programs on your, on your websites. With that, if you want more information, you can just go to pleasego.vote. You can get the full Prezzo plus like a giant, interactive database and stuff. It's super, super fun. With that, I will pass the mic to Mr. G. There we go. Thank you.
How do I get set up?
How do you get up? That is a great question. We're gonna science the crap out of this, right? Okay. That one's not you. Is one of those yours? Yeah.
One of those is me. Good? You're not good. Okay, we are good. My name is John Jurlai. Excuse my voice. So I am going to talk a little bit today about auditing voter registration databases, and there's been a lot of focus on auditing being risk-limited auditing and auditing about ballots. But if we take a more holistic perspective, there's a lot of aspects of the elections systems that can be audited, such as geopolitical districts, making sure people get the right ballot on election day. Obviously, voter registration, and I'm missing one here. Oh, well. So a little bit of my background. I spent 10 years in election administration. I was lead developer of the statewide voter registration database for a state somewhere in between Indiana and Pennsylvania. And today's talk will not be specific to any particular database vendor, but you probably know which one I was dealing with. So why do we audit in general? In information systems generally, it's to enable accountability for users' actions, to hopefully deter them from doing bad things, but also make sure that they understand that they need to take their jobs seriously. And it also helps us investigate when we are suspicious of people's activity and make sure that we can check people's work and hold them accountable. I'd say the most important thing is that it allows us to understand and deal with the fact that as hard as we may try to secure systems, there will be security holes that we don't anticipate. There will be zero-day attacks. There will be software and hardware vulnerabilities. And auditing allows us to find those things after the fact and hopefully remedy them. So this is an example feedback loop where you would start by collecting an audit record, and that would be something that you would trust to compare against. You would then analyze those records and, based on the analysis, make feedback to your system and hopefully continue this virtuous cycle. So talking about voter registration auditing, you probably think, well, we're talking about auditing the data in the system, make sure that we're catching manipulations of a voter registration database. But most DBAs and people who are in databases think of auditing a little bit differently, and it's about controlling access to the data. So in a sense, it's almost preventative. And we have all these systems that we log into. We have Windows, we have some web portal called State VRDB, we have our database, we have our phones, and how many logins do you have to go through to just, go about your business on a given day. So we have a ton of logins, and all of those need to be audited and checked to make sure that people have the permissions they need and know more than what they need to do their job. So I'm going to rely on this laser pointer that I got from Neil. So this diagram, hopefully, it looks okay there, explains how people get authenticated on a system. So you have a server that's basically checking your identity. So that's probably through passwords or two-factor authentication, and says, okay, you are Leah or you are Daniel. And then the operating systems or the voter registration front end says, okay, you're authenticated against the directory server, which we trust, so we trust that you are Leah and Daniel. But then you go down here to the voter registration database itself, and it's got its own authentication. And you quickly find out that it is not authenticating Leah or Daniel or Miriam. It's authenticating a single user called VRDB user. So it's essentially a single point of failure, and this is not unique to any particular state. This is kind of the reality of how web-based systems are built. So obviously users should only have the rights they need in the applications they use, but we need to understand that not all users are living beings. They can be non-person entities, such as applications, such as the voter registration database. And those should only have the rights they need. So how do we audit these systems? This is, an example. Your mileage may vary. but this is basically what I did in the state of Ohio. So you get the big old list of users. You map these users to people. If you've got a good naming convention like first initial, last name, that should be pretty easy. Do they work here still? Did they ever work here? Hopefully you don't have any of those. If they still work here, are they in the same position? You know, if you don't do audits on a continuous basis, people move between departments and they may have more rights than they need. If people don't have the rights they need, you find out about that right away. But having too many rights, nobody complains about that. Then you deactivate those accounts, you delete them, you follow up, make sure that, you know, you're adjusting rights as appropriate. Getting a little bit into the weeds, we can grant rights to roles and groups. It's kind of like a set of rights that go along with the job description. So if I'm a clerk, I might have a set of rights to update voters, create voters, delete voters. I might have a role for campaign finance that only deals with the campaign finance system and adjusting contributions and things of that nature. And then we have this nagging concern about these application users. So this is where it gets really wonky, which is my happy place, but it's probably not everybody's. So how do we deal with these application users? We talked about that single user who's logging in on behalf of some middleware system, such as a website that presents itself as the voter registration database. You don't want spaghetti code. I think everybody understands that's a pejorative. So assuming that your developers do things the right way, you should have what's called a database access layer, which is this one module that handles database access. And that will allow auditors to go in and say, okay, here are all the things the system can do, and we can lock it down based on that. If it's doing more than it should, or somebody's put in a back door, we can definitely, you know, find those things, hopefully. There's also a nuance to how the application can make queries against the database, and queries in database terms includes inserting records, updating records, and deleting records, not just selecting records. So if the middleware is able to query directly, it's much harder to lock down those systems, because you basically have to open up all of your data tables to any, and I only have 2 minutes, so I'm going to go fast. So basically, you want to rely on what are called stored procedures. Developers hate them, DBAs love them. It's going to be a fight for the rest of my lifetime, but the DBAs won this battle, and your offices should listen to their advice. All right, auditing the database data, probably what most of you think of as auditing. You need to, just like in a CVR is your audit record for ballots, you need to have an audit record for your voter registration database. You need to know what's in there: logins, data access, data manipulation. What level of granularity do you need? Is it fine to know that just Bob logged in? Or would it be nice to know that Bob looked at a particular voter's record? You're going to need to, first of all, know what's being audited now, and does it meet your audit needs? Can it answer the questions you have? So this is a methodology for building an audit trail. You need to locate the sensitive data, your PII. But not only that, since we're talking about voter registration, eligibility is very important. So you want to audit around information that could potentially disenfranchise voters if it was manipulated, such as addresses, districts, eligibility status. So this is a new area, and there's not a lot of existing practices to rely on, but Michael Alvarez from Caltech worked with Orange County and Neil Kelly to audit their voter registration database, and did a number of snapshots on a daily basis to look for what he called events. The statistical method is called interquartile range. I don't know what that means, but I assume many people here do. And the paper is available at that hyperlink if anybody is interested in taking a look at that. But even without a methodology such as that, continuously monitoring and looking at your audit logs, is a good first step. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Great. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Beata Martin Rosa Malo. It's a very long name, but I'm very pleased to be here from IFAS, the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, and I'm sure many of you may not be familiar with us. To just give a little bit of a background, so we're basically international facing as an international NGO, providing technical assistance to election commissions around the world globally. So we've been involved in more than 150 countries worldwide, currently active in 47 countries with field operations in all of these places. I'm responsible for Europe and Eurasia, so basically covering the former Soviet Union, the Balkans, Europe, and to some extent North America. And in my previous career, I was the head of elections for the OSCE ODIHR, so basically deploying all of the election observation missions across 57 participating states. So altogether, I've been involved in about 200 elections in more than 55 countries. And I think that kind of comparative perspective really brings a lot of interesting issues to the forefront. And here in the United States, I know that many people were, I think, surprised in 2016 when the various attacks happened, especially against the voter registration databases. But I wanted to first start by giving a little bit of a background and a sort of prehistory to what happened here, and then examine some of the recent elections, particularly in Nigeria, in Indonesia, and in Ukraine, which are happening right now, to give you a taste of what may be coming next. So the way that I look at this is really sort of in three stages, and I kind of characterize the attacks by foreign adversaries prior to 2014, in the period between 2014 to 2016, and then after 2016, what comes next. And I have a nice little graphical representation of this. So if you look at the map of Europe here, prior to 2014, you basically have attacks in Estonia, in Georgia, in Lithuania, in Kyrgyzstan. And these are primarily DDoS attacks with the intention of bringing down internet infrastructure. And in many cases, very successful. In Kyrgyzstan, the network was brought down for 10 days. So imagine a country with no internet for 10 days. That's quite a serious problem. And also attempts to link that with hybrid warfare, particularly in Georgia in 2008, where the internet infrastructure was attacked to soften up before a military invasion. That was later used in Ukraine in 2014. But I think 2014 is really the next testing point, and particularly in Ukraine, where the focus by these foreign actors, and particularly advanced persistent threats 28 and 29, some of you may know them as Fancy Bear and Cozy Bear, target or start targeting election infrastructure at different levels. And so in Ukraine in 2014, during the presidential election in March, you have a three-pronged attack aimed at Ukraine's election infrastructure at different levels, including the voting system, including the reporting system, including the voter registration system, really to undermine, as Suzanne said earlier today, confidence in the government, confidence in the democratic process. And you'll see that as a developing narrative in further attacks as well, that it's not necessarily to achieve certain results as much as to sow doubt and to create the idea that there's confusion and chaos and that voters should not have confidence in their election systems. In this particular case in Ukraine, it was interesting because they actually did hack in to the internet-facing voter results website and tried to change that result. So in Moscow, a different candidate was announced as having won the elections minutes before the Election Commission actually caught that hack and were able to fix it. But there was a clear intention to present a different candidate as having won the election in order to create that kind of a public outcry. This then continued in France, in Germany, another attack in 2015 in Ukraine, and much more attributable there to those foreign adversaries and those advanced persistent threats, and ultimately culminating in the United States in 2016, gone through that, with the incursions into the voter registration databases, 7 broken into, at least 1 had voter registration data tampered with, and of course that was fixed because of the way in which that was organized, but there was a clear probing with the intent through a variety of techniques. So the significance of all of this, before I look forward, is that it's clearly an iterative process. So these foreign adversaries are using different elections as a weapons testing ground in order to try different types of techniques, different types of incursions, to learn lessons from what they achieve in certain cases, and then to redeploy that in further elections with the intention of disruption and harm. These attempts in 2016 in the United States are currently being adjusted. They're being tested in recent elections globally. And similarly, whatever attacks take place in these elections are likely to be further exploited in other parts of the world, likely to come to you in 2020. Recent elections in Nigeria. So the Nigerians have a biometric voter registration system with fingerprinting technology and biometric voter registration cards. The INEC, which is the centralized election commission in Nigeria, has confirmed that there were unsuccessful attempts, but people did try to hack into their voter registration card readers through the back-end server. They also tried to attack the piloted results transmission system. There is a reluctance on the part of the Nigerians. They're not as open as some to share information very readily, but they're still learning lessons from that election that took place. They haven't indicated the number of attempts and whether they were successful or unsuccessful. And there's also no mention of whether their online voter registration lookup register had been attacked, but there's a presumption that that would have been subject to attempts. Bit of a closed box. But in other countries, like in Indonesia, where we have a much better relationship, the current elections are under attack by Chinese and Russian hackers. That's very clear. While there were 2 successful attempts in 2004, there were 50 successful attempts in 2018, so the number has increased significantly. And they're facing something like 2,000 to 3,000 unsuccessful attempts per month in the run-up to their elections. So it's quite a significant onslaught that's going on there. Their problems, I would say, up to this date have been mainly organizational issues with the way in which they handle their systems and the sort of procedural elements that they have. Their voter registration data backup was found to be on a server repository, and it's very poorly protected. And this was just uncovered on Monday through a simple probe. So that's been immediately removed, but they're investigating currently whether there was any access by a third party and whether there were any attempts to change that voter registration data before the April election. And then also they've discovered that their municipal elections data was dumped onto a Java publication website. There's flaws in the way that the access framework was designed. And so in theory, anyone could really retrieve records using voter IDs, which are easy to hack an incremental digit code, and an investigation is ongoing there. But overall, there's quite poor hygiene, which is one element that needs to be addressed, and bad practices on the part of software developers, which are leading to these kinds of problems. And then lastly, in Ukraine, Ukraine just a couple of weeks ago faced a large-scale CEC, Central Election Commission, infrastructure intrusion attempt, so a brute force attack. So they're really going heavy-handed in trying to get into these Central Election Commission servers and data. And then on the 26th, the SBU, which is the equivalent of the NSA for the Ukrainians, uncovered a plot where a telecommunications contractor with Russian ties has been collecting data on strategically important mobile operators, telecommunication nodes, periods of time necessary to recover after damage. And so there's quite clear indications that there's an objective to disrupt telecommunication nodes for the state registry service in preparation of the elections. The key lessons learned is that there is a great need on the part of many international election management bodies for coordination. Very often they don't have clear lines of communication, they don't have clear protocols, they sometimes don't even know which agencies are dealing with what elements of their cyber infrastructure. There's also, like in the United States in 2016, a need for clearances. So many times the people who receive the information aren't able to transmit that or to do anything effective with it. Communications in terms of clear messaging to the public so that that confidence is not destroyed, and the need for training for these officials at all levels, including on basic cyber understanding, cyber hygiene, and things of that effort. And then just a few words on our work as IFAS. So we're increasingly developing a profile in cybersecurity and elections. We have developed a methodology which has been piloted in both Ukraine and in Indonesia on a cyber security and elections assessment, where you can look at vulnerabilities strategically and try to develop a plan of how to move forward. We're also looking at framework documents that we can develop in terms of best practice from around the world in this area. We're assisting in developing cyber strategies for election management bodies ahead of elections. We're starting to develop trainings on cyber issues and cyber hygiene at all levels of election commissions, which we're planning to deploy across the European region this June. Tabletop crisis simulations so that commissions can learn in real time, and also the development of communication strategies and techniques so election commissions can be at the forefront of providing truthful information in a way to deal with the confidence in the election process. And so just in conclusion, increasingly security and voter registration is really an issue of global concern. It should be of interest to all parties, and I think that there's much more need for sharing information and best practice, not only within this community, but across different communities worldwide to learn about what's going on in different places. Planning for eventual exploits and attacks, and we need to do this early in the election process so that proper mitigating measures can be developed in a timely manner and not in an ad hoc way at the last moment. Coordination, obviously, so that systems can respond holistically, rapidly and effectively, rather than in the piecemeal fashion that they're doing at the moment. And transparency and communication, and I think this is really crucial in terms of interfacing with citizens and voters so that they understand what states are doing and they understand what kinds of responses are being developed and continue to have confidence and faith in their elections rather than becoming disenfranchised and not participating. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much, and I hope that was of interest.
Thank you. So we have a few technical difficulties. Totally, yeah, nothing happened there, people. So yeah, we have a few moments for questions. I think we actually have around 10 minutes. I'm going to take the first one. Actually going to ask, Beata to prognosticate, forecast. What types of tax do you think the U.S. should expect in 2020? What should we be ready for?
Yes, I think one of the trends is to really try to attack central election commissions, which obviously in the United States is not a problem because it's so disaggregated and so piecemeal. So in a way, that kind of a system is at an advantage because it's very difficult to attack in through brute force and try to change results at the highest level. However, the continuation of attempts to get into voter registration databases, to change the data, to mislocate people, and then to supplement that with disinformation campaigns, which present all kinds of conspiracy theories about why people are being left out or deleted or moved, can lead to significant disenfranchisement. It can lead to a lack of public confidence, but in certain countries it can also lead to potential violence and even death. And so you saw in the Nigerian case that there were a number of different disinformation campaigns spreading false information on where voters were located, why they weren't able to vote, and in certain cases it almost came to a violent situation. So I wouldn't anticipate that level in the United States, I hope, but definitely attempts to couple that sort of technique in order to use data manipulation to achieve certain societal violence and tension.
Wow. Wow. And then, John, so, you know, we've seen some of these attack patterns here. You know, I mean, you know, do we think that we have a sufficient, you know, voter registration auditing framework, you know, available? I mean, you know, are we at the place where, you know, we have the potential to actually detect these types of, you know, modifications of data?
So Michael Alvarez's work was in, I want to say, the primary and general of 2018, so just last year. And I'm not aware of any other published methodologies that exist, so I'd say that this area is fairly immature. With that said, DBAs and database people have been doing audits in various spaces where it matters, especially think like banking.
Sure.
So really starting with having a good audit record, even if you don't have the methodology, is a good starting point.
Love it.
And yeah.
Awesome. Questions? I saw Susan's hand first. Sorry, folks.
Hi, Susan Jedushitska-Swina, and I really liked your name. Yeah, I'm curious from Josh and maybe John, if in your work you've identified how many, if any, states are implementing threat detection systems around the voter registration database process or data entry process or anything around that, where they're trying to stay ahead of the game and detect and figure out what's going on before it hits them.
Sure, yeah. I'll take the first swing at it. So what is nice about voter registration systems is that, you know, the actual architecture isn't super unique. And so we actually have pretty decent commercial products that can be put into, you know, place that don't have to be really changed in order to have a, you know, fair degree of effectiveness. I have talked with a number of election officials about the types of, you know, controls that they are putting into place. I've generally felt fairly confident about that. But the issue with voter registration systems is sort of akin to what we saw with, you know, the first round of, you know, the introduction of electronic voting systems, in that they are still sort of a black box. It is, you know, difficult to get, you know, some sort of evidence that they haven't been, you know, manipulated in some way, and so it is sort of an interesting issue. But I have definitely seen states, you know, step up their game. Oh.
One of these, yeah. Oh, no, I got
Oh, please.
Yeah. So I left the state in 2017, so I wasn't around for the latest disbursement of HAVA funds, but I would say that money was very welcome. And intrusion detection systems may continue to be beyond the reach of small jurisdictions. Ohio's bottom-up state. That means that every county has their own voter registration database. Are those all equally secure? I don't know. If these systems are, if intrusion detection systems are commercial systems that, you know, the best ones, how much does it average?
Hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, does Pickaway County, does a county with 15,000 population, never mind registered voters, Do you think they've got the money for, $100,000 outlay for that? That might be like 50% of their budget for their Board of Elections.
Snort's not bad. Yeah, definitely.
Here. Susan Greenhall, National Election Defense Coalition for Beata. I have two questions for you. The first is on the Ukrainian attack from 2014. Does IFAS have something written up on that? Because there isn't a lot in the American press. There's one Christian Science Monitor story on it, and that's it. So that's number one. And then the second question is, yesterday we heard about the concerns of voter registration database records showing up strangely with people's addresses being slightly altered. Has that sort of phenomenon been observed in other countries and attributed to an attack in any way? And maybe I didn't understand if it is specifically. So those are my two questions.
No, very good questions. And I think with the Ukrainian authorities, we're now building a relationship over the last year where when we started working with them on these issues last June, they were very closed and very reticent to share information. Now, 6 months down the line, I think there's a lot more openness and a lot more discussion. And so we're together with them piecing together exactly what happened in 2014, which, at some level, I don't think that they fully understand themselves. And I hope that that will result in something which will be more transparent in terms of publication so that people are aware of what the narrative was and be able to analyze all those different vector points. To date, I'm not aware of any kind of analysis like that. With the voter registration, in Nigeria, there was indication that voter records had been tampered with. It's unclear whether it's a foreign actor or whether it's domestically sponsored. But there were individuals who had turned up at polling stations and either weren't allowed to vote because of misspellings in their names or because they had been reallocated to a different polling station. And in certain ethnic areas, that produces a violence element. So it was contained, but there was clear evidence that it had happened. The attribution is not yet clear, and so that's something which we hope with the INEC in Nigeria we'll be able to work on, but they're very reticent to share any information on it. Not to my awareness, but again, I think many of the commissions in Europe are as under-resourced as anywhere else, and so until this really came to light in 2016, I don't think people really had thought to look at it in the level of detail that's required. And I think as people start to examine these records more systematically, they may find that there is more intrusion than they had imagined previously.